We have 115 people registered so far, but we're just going to wait another couple minutes before we can get started. Good evening, cooperators, and thank you for joining the CHF BC team, albeit from a distance, for our virtual COVID-19 town hall. I'm Michelle Iverson, the Chief Operating Officer for CHF BC and Coho Management and the Community Land Trust, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator for this evening's event. It's a part of normal meeting procedure at CHFBC to acknowledge the traditional territories of the First Nations on whose land we gather. But tonight, we're joined by co-op members from all over the province, and we're meeting virtually. But we should acknowledge that there's 198 distinct First Nations in British Columbia, and 95% of the land is unceded. So let's commit ourselves to the kind of thought and action that's meaningful towards reconciliation with the original stewards of the land of which we work and live. It was almost a month ago today when the CHFBC team met and the planning for our education conference came to a screeching halt. We realized that it had to be postponed. And our lives became daily updates with the Prime Minister at 7 a.m. and then tuning in at 3 o'clock with Dr. Bonnie Henry and Minister Adrian Dix to find out what was going on. And then came the messages from our members. There were emails and there were questions. And the reality of the pandemic didn't just hit globally, but it was really taking root in our co-op communities. And people were asking us all kinds of questions, like there's a member that has been diagnosed with COVID-19. Should we be letting the entire co-op know? Can we still have our AGM? Can we still have maintenance work done in our unit? What about all of our members that are losing their jobs? And what can we do for them? And our members are not practicing physical distancing. What should we do? So as the country was trying to flatten the curve, the CHFBC packed up our offices. We started working remotely, and we attempted to we did get ahead of the curve to ensure that when those financial assistance relief was coming out, that the voice of housing co-ops was at the table and we weren't left behind. And we were getting those messages out to you. We were using e-news and social media. We were answering telephone calls, sending out emails, and we're still going to do all of that. But tonight's virtual town hall is another layer. It's a different platform by which we can share our message, tell you what we know, hear some of your questions, and just continue to share information with you. Our panel tonight includes many familiar faces. The CEO of CHFBC, Coho Management, and the Community Land Trust, Thom Armstrong, is here. And Fiona Jackson is our champion for our member engagement, and she's our communications director, and she's also here. And she is also one of the team with Ed Dagzan, our co-op services advisor, who answers your questions and has been on the other side of that as well. But behind the scenes, not just the panel that's here, but running the show is Debbie Van Kuyk, who you all know is our education and events coordinator and our resident webinar expert, and her colleague, our colleague, Liz McDonald. Liz has already started the chat going, and she's introduced herself on the chat. And during the town hall, she'll be asking some questions to get everybody engaged. And also the rest of the team is online. There's some CHFBC staff online, and I believe one of our staff, our telecom, is tuned in from India because she is grounded in India and unable to get back home, but she's also attending with us as well. So so let's get started. This is what your panel looks like. This is the panel, and this is what you've probably seen, and this is where you can answer questions, and you can see that's where the chat box is. So if you want to ask any questions, I'm telling you about that, but there's a ton of questions already coming in. So what'll happen is I will read the questions. We're going to have presentations and I'll read the questions into the meeting. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. But like I said, right now we had over 180 people that registered, and already 130 are online and attending this webinar. So we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. But if we can't, we will to you. This meeting will be recorded, so you'll be able to access it online after the event. This is the representation of everybody that's online, and you can see that we have people from all over British Columbia, and also we have people from, I believe, registered from Alberta as well. Before we hear from our CEO, just a couple things that remember to mute your microphones. I notice everyone already has done that. And about 7 p.m. we are going to pause the town hall for a bit and take a moment, as has become our tradition, to thank the staff that are working the front line. Also, we're going to be using polls throughout the webinar, so I want to share the results with you, and I just want to do a trial poll right now to see how it's all going to go. So I'm going to launch a poll right now. You should see it on your screen, and you can vote. I'll keep it open for 25 to 30 seconds. Okay, so there it is. I'm just going to close it up for now. This is just a trial run anyways. So these are the results. Let's see how everybody's doing. Looks like 85% is having good and bad days. That's the same here for me as well. Okay, so let's hear from our CEO, Thom Armstrong.
Thanks, everyone, and good evening. We all have good and bad days too, so I hope this will turn out to be a good day. I just want to start by welcoming you to our first webinar. I know there's a lot of anxiety, not just around the pandemic, but around how we're going to make out with some of the technological challenges this evening. This is our first try at this with this many people online, and we've got a hardworking team that's done their best to make it a positive experience for you. I guess I wanted to say to you, you know, pandemic or not, the job for housing co-op directors and managers doesn't change, does it, really? It's about safe, secure homes, sound finances, a strong community, and we're here to help you with all of those. And we've been doing a lot of that work behind the scenes to make sure that as government rolls out programs to assist individuals and organizations, that co-ops are in the mix, because sometimes government can overlook us, and to make sure that you're aware of what's happening in government and in the civil society to make sure you can take advantage of those programs. I've said before that co-ops are built for this. And you can be sure that we're not in this exercise just to survive. We're in it to thrive and to come out of the pandemic period stronger than ever. And I know that the same spirit is being brought to the effort that co-ops are making to keep their communities strong and keep their members united. So I want to thank our staff who've put so much work into serving your needs and interests, our board for being so supportive, and of course our members for being there united around the mission and goals of the Federation. Want to wish you all the best and encourage you to be patient with each other and be kind, and we'll have the biggest party you've ever seen in the co-op housing sector when we get through this period of the state of emergency and the pandemic itself. So the rest of the evening goes well, and we're looking forward to doing this many more times in the next few months, and we'll have some news about that, not only about government program eligibility, but about our plans for the next 2 to 3 months as we rally ourselves and recalibrate our services to meet your needs. So let's get on with the show.
Thanks, Tom. So here's the agenda. This is what we're going to go through today. So the format is going to be, we'll have a small presentation, give a quick update, and then we'll take some questions. We're going to try and get to your questions after each of the outlines that are here as well. So shall we get started? So who's taking this one? Is that Fiona?
Yep.
Thank you.
Where's my camera? I don't have my camera on, but just wanted to say, I don't see myself. Hi everybody, I'm Fiona, and I've spoken to many of you, and I hope that a lot of you have found our resources on our website. We created these, as Michelle was saying, in response to the many questions and concerns of housing co-ops with the very changing circumstances of COVID-19. So we have a whole resource section on our website called COVID-19 Response. And in there you will find just general information, but also very specific information relating to holding co-op meetings, dealing with any members in financial distress or the co-op's financial distress, And we have an additional area where we have concern for community, where co-ops can think more about what they're doing within their community and in the wider community through this time of pandemic. I think
Did you
there's
want me
another
to switch
slide.
slide? Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
please. So yeah, that's
So I
an
keep going?
example of what you can see, yeah, on the website.
Okay. Okay.
And next slide. So yeah, it's broken into these various categories. You'll find all that there. And we're going to be covering a lot of those kind of questions tonight. So, you know, after this meeting, if you want to keep looking for more information, that page, those resource pages, we are constantly updating as we learn more. And as we get new information or things change, that's where you'll find it. So you can also sign up for our e-newsletter if you don't already get it, because we will announce anything new in our newsletter. And you can sign up for that at chf.bc.ca /newsletter. So next slide.
Okay.
Right, so this, I'm going to turn the slides over to my colleague Ed, because he's going to answer some of the tough questions.
All right, thanks, Fiona. So yes, I'm Ed. I'm one of the staff team members who respond to some of the member inquiries coming into CHF BC. So you may be familiar with some of these questions because we've tried to advise you on them, but some of you may not. So we'll just go through some of these. You're all probably familiar with the language around physical distancing. So that means staying 2 meters apart from each other, and then as well limiting those social interactions and contact between the households. But what does that mean for your individual housing co-ops? So that might mean limiting the interactions in your common areas, restricting any in your courtyards, for example, or any other courtyard common areas like your laundry rooms. Your co-op may be needing to look at restricting the number of people in those spaces. You might also be thinking about closing your co-op offices. I know many of our recommendation is that you do close your co-op office and try to protect your own staffs and your management company in order to protect them. So those are some of the things that we've recommended to enforce physical distancing within co-ops, and your co-ops may also be looking at other ways to do that. The important thing to do in regards to this is letting your members aware of how the co-op is responding to the pandemic. So things like, has the co-op sent out notices in regards to how the operations will continue for the co-op? Have you developed some procedures around the collection of housing charges and what to do with members in regards to if they're facing financial distress? So those are the things that it's important to keep members engaged and letting them know that the co-op is still there and continuing to do business, but is looking out for them, looking out for their health and safety and for the viability of the co-op. The co-op may also be looking at how are you dealing with, as I mentioned, the common spaces. So are you putting up notices around saying you're restricting the number of people? What kind of cleaning procedures are being implemented to protect the members and the employees that are on the premises? So those are just things to let members know, to reassure them that the co-op is doing the best that they can during this pandemic. Lastly, how can members support each other? So as many of our communities have vulnerable individuals, it's important to let them know that people are acknowledging them and to know that somebody's thinking about them. So how can we do that? Members can think about, while practicing physical distancing, think about how can we support those members who are not able to go out to do their grocery shopping, to pick up their prescriptions. Perhaps setting up a system where members can do some of those services to help members out. So those are some of the things that clubs can do in the concern for community during this special time. What we'd like you to do is, if you have any, if your co-op has done anything, any members who've done anything to help each other out, please enter them in the chat box and let us know how your community is keeping engaged in the system and supporting each other. I think that's we need all of these ideas to kind of reassure us that we're going to get through this together, and that we'll all get back to the other side.
Thanks, Ed. I think that's quite a question that we get often, is members that are not practicing physical distancing at the co-op. So I thought we would just launch a poll out there and see how co-op members are responding to physical distancing at the co-op. And it should be on your screens right now. So we'd really like to hear from you. It is a question that comes our way very often. So I'll hold it open for another 10 or 15 seconds. Okay, so I'm just going to close the poll right now and share the results. Well, we're definitely cooperative, 50-50. 56% saying that almost all our members are responding, and 41% saying that some members get it. And this vote was 62% of the people that are on this webinar right now. And our numbers are at about 140 participants. So thanks for that. I'll go ahead with the next one, which is the issue of privacy and co-op operations. So who's going to tackle that question?
Yeah, me again.
Okay.
So that, I mean, those results are great. I mean, it just shows that we're all trying to kind of understand what's happening and just understand how we can best have the best practices around the pandemic. So another section that has come up in our inquiries is around privacy. As Michelle mentioned at the top of this session, some of the inquiries that we've been getting is, if somebody's contracted COVID-19, does the co-op have to disclose that to the community? And what are the procedures that need to be implemented? And we've checked with Office of Privacy Commissioner and the best practices from the management companies that we represent, that the best practices know that the co-op does not need to disclose who has contracted COVID within the co-op. But there are other ways that the co-op can continue to reassure the membership that the co-op is looking out for their health and safety. And as well, members need to practice their own by enforcing the physical distancing. So we're hoping that all of your communities are practicing physical distancing, and that because you're doing that, you won't need to disclose if it happens, having to disclose who has COVID-19, because if everybody's practicing physical distancing, then there should be no problem of having to report if someone has it or not. But the key answer is no, the co-op does not have to disclose who has contracted COVID. The second aspect to this is we're now moving fast into this virtual world. And as many of you have experienced, you've had to submit applications online. And that opens up, a lot of our members to cyber attacks or problems in regards to cybersecurity with this new online world. So we're, a lot of our resources, we have some resources from BC Housing that also that you can rely on and say that now is the time to be vigilant and be aware of how some of the sites that you're accessing and the information you're sharing. So some of the tips that we've offered is that make sure that you're looking at the sources of the different sites that you're looking into. Watch out for those phishing emails, trying to collect personal information on yourselves, especially as many of our members are trying to access some financial assistance online. So it's important to do that. And there's some other personal tips that you can do, such as changing your passwords regularly, making sure that those are that they're strong, and as well as that you regularly backing up your file systems. Many times, virus can attack a computer, and there goes your whole file system. There goes all your photo albums. So it's important to remind yourself that yes, you have to do these things, just as we've done outside of the pandemic, and to continue to be vigilant and be aware that we need to protect our own personal information during this time.
So it reminds me of questions that we've had with respect to physical distancing, in that what might happen. I remember this call from someone is that if somebody is outed for having not physical distance, sorry, exposure to COVID-19, that they can actually by highlighting that, people are actually now going to not want to disclose that they have it because of the way that the co-op is handling that. Do you remember that?
That's right. Yeah. So rather than, of course, members who may have contracted COVID could disclose that to the co-op, but rather than outing them, the onus should be on the member that you're obtaining that consent from the member in the way that they're disclosing that information to the co-op to share it widely to the rest of the members.
Okay, great. So the next question deals with, is this financial? Is that you, Tom, or did I miss one? No, this is right, yeah. So who's dealing with the financial and the collection? This is
So that's Tom?
I think I am.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So we have had a lot of questions on this topic. In fact, many co-ops took some very quick action in an attempt to respond to some very acute situations among their members. So our advice on this has been generally in the same way that with respect to the pandemic, we say follow the science. On the issue of collecting housing charges and managing the finances of the co-op, we say follow the data. So we did some surveying. We have a fairly large sample of co-ops that we have access to. And the information we have is that roughly 85% of the housing charges owed at April 1st were collected. So there was a lot of question around, how quickly would the pandemic hit co-ops on the revenue side, and the answer for April is not very significantly. Now there's a big question around May as the job losses start to trickle through the economy and through co-op communities, and there will have to be a lot of vigilance around this, but. The immediate impact was not felt in April by many co-ops, and that's where I think some co-ops might have acted too quickly in taking decisions to forgive all or some of every member's housing charge. The thing to remember here, I think what makes co-ops unique is that you are not only friends and neighbors, but you're shareholders in a housing enterprise, and you have to have really two hats on at the same time, especially if you're a director of the co-op. What's the compassionate, responsive thing to do for members, and what's in the best long-term interests of the housing co-op. And our advice to co-ops who are wondering how they should respond to the potential loss of income among members is, before you take any action, before you take any material decisions, reach out to your members and find out exactly what their situation is, because that communication is a two-way street. In many co-ops, memberships didn't experience a significant job loss at all in April. Again, maybe May will be different. We don't know. So for a co-op where most members didn't have an interruption in their income stream, the question of forgiveness or deferral of housing charges didn't really need to come up. But in the case of co-ops that where members do experience a significant disruption in income, you need to know that before you can decide what action the co-op is going to take, and so that you can have a look at the cash flow of the co-op and ask yourself, is this going to impair our ability to meet our ongoing financial obligations? So, some of the questions we had were, how do we respond? to the potential for income loss. And our initial answer was, well, ask members if they have indeed experienced income loss. And don't be afraid to ask them to show you documents that would substantiate that income loss, because you're going to need that, and so is the member, when it comes time to enter into an arrangement, initially to defer housing charge payments, and then downstream have a conversation about whether some of those receivables need to be written off. Because there was, of course, an announcement by the province that there's been a rent freeze applied and an eviction ban applied, and we got a lot of questions from co-ops around whether or not that applies to them. And the short answer is no, because co-ops are not subject to the Residential Tenancy Act, and the ministerial order did not touch co-ops in that way. Now, having said that, you've heard both BC Housing and CMHC say that co-ops that plan to access the benefits of government assistance during this time of pandemic are going to be expected to show compassion around evictions for grounds of non-payment. And that's something, of course, to bear in mind as you move through this phase. Other co-ops have been asking us, well, and particularly boards may have found themselves with a housing charge increase that had been approved by members, say at a members meeting 2 months ago, and coming to the decision not to implement that increase. So we had a lot of co-ops say, does the board have the authority to overturn a decision of the members for a planned housing charge increase? And again, the short answer to that question is no, but there are strategies for responding to that. Imagine the board feels that it's an inappropriate time to implement an increase, and that might be some of the feedback that it's getting from members. And while the board can't overturn a decision that the members have made, the board certainly can determine the conditions on which it collects the amounts owing from the members. So we've had some boards say to members, notwithstanding that you've approved a housing charge increase, we think the best thing to do now is only to demand as receivable from members the amount of the housing charges in force before the increase was due to take effect. Now, you still have to carry that amount on your books as a receivable, because you don't have the members' approval to change the decision they made about annual housing charges. But that's not a problem if you plan to go to the members down the road and say, do you expect us now to make arrangements with members who didn't pay the full amount to now collect that receivable on some arrangement that's acceptable to them, or do you plan to forgive those amounts? And that's a decision that the members can make down the road. So boards are charged with the responsibility in some cases of implementing decisions that members have made, and in others in trying to figure out a way to act in the best interests of the co-op. Members who do face a loss of income, of course, under some of the programs that are financed federally and provincially, have the opportunity to apply for additional subsidy monies if those monies are available. And we'll talk in a few minutes about some of the programs that are available to assist members and co-ops. And finally, there was a question around in-person exchange of money and receipts. And on those questions, we see fewer and fewer checks changing hands. Certainly, cash is virtually a thing of the past in co-ops, and it's a relatively easy manner to continue electronic transfers where they've been in place, and where there are payments being made by checks. Arrangements are being made for members to drop checks off and then to have them collected later, so that the payer and the payee don't come into direct contact with each other. So that's an option that's available to you. So bottom line on this one is don't take action on housing charge deferral or housing charge forgiveness until you know that the situation your members find themselves in justifies it, and then make sure that you make prudent arrangements that take into account the needs of members and the interests of the co-op.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to do a quick poll, and then I'm getting quite a few questions on this, so I will start the poll, and then while people are responding, give you an opportunity to answer those questions. So we're going to find out this poll on how many like Tom said, 85% of members for April said they were able to collect the housing charges. But what does May look like for your housing co-op? And Tom, I'm just going to go through some of the questions that. Are you still there?
I am.
Okay, good. Sorry.
I'm always here.
Okay. Sorry, I lost my okay. So some of the questions, we're getting a lot of questions on BC Housing temporary rentals supplement, and if there's rental assistance available for market renters living in housing cooperatives. And also another question, or maybe this is a comment on one co-op is thinking of not charging for laundry because of the transfer of coins. Did you want to answer the question, or maybe just talk a little bit more about the rental assistant for market renters and
Sure. Well,
eligibility?
so I think I'm going to do the laundry comment or question first, because I think
Sure.
that's an example of a very creative approach to dealing with the situation where, you know, if you leave the existing laundry situation in place, you make it inevitable that the physical distancing practices or best practices are going to be breached, because, you know, let's face it, laundry rooms are not just places where people do laundry. They're social touch points. They're places where people interact, and it's, you know, this stuff, it's very counterintuitive for housing co-ops to try and enforce conditions that limit the contact people can have with each other, because that's what makes housing co-ops such great places to live. So, but as counterintuitive as it is, it's really important, and we have to do things that we would normally, you know, things we would normally describe as unacceptable in co-ops, or examples of the difference between housing co-ops and other forms of tenure or housing. But that's what the science says. That's what you know, Dr. Henry says, and until we have different advice and different instructions, that's what we should be doing. So I think you know, giving up a revenue opportunity in order to enforce or encourage a more rigorous application of those physical distancing practices is very creative. My answer on the temporary rent sup issue is going to be very short, because we have a slide on that coming up, and we have some good news for you on that literally we were able to negotiate earlier today. So I'm gonna keep my powder dry on that one until that slide
Okay.
comes up.
So I'll hold off any more questions about that, and I will share the results. You could see that 56% feel that most of their members, at 85%, similar numbers to last April, will be able to pay their housing charges for May. So that's interesting.
And that's
25%
great
have
news.
no idea. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Now I should say that, you know, the 25 or 26% who said we have no idea,
Should ask, right?
those are the people I would say you need to have an idea, because, you know, now you have a few days to go until May 1st. It's always better to be dealing with an arrangement to defer or pay housing charges that are owed over time before the due date. One, so that you can make reasonable arrangements with your members, but two, so that you can make a cash flow projection against your major obligations based on data rather than speculation.
Great, thank you so much. So our next slide, next question is very popular. This deals with maintenance and what sort of operations can happen. And is that Ed that's going to deal with that, right?
That's right. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so we based our advice around maintenance based on our conversations with our own coho management as well as BC Housing. So these are the best practices that's out there right now. So in regards to unit inspections, most of you will be familiar, will most likely be practicing that through an annual unit inspections. So we would like you to frame it as, is it essential for right now? Can it be postponed? Most likely an annual unit inspection can be postponed to a later time when we can, you can do so. But things like a move out inspection may need to be done. So something to think about is, if move-out inspections need to be done, can it be done safely? So what does that look like? So it might look like making sure that it's only done when it's a vacant unit. And if it's a vacant unit, making sure that it's done perhaps after the member has moved out, after 48 hours time or so. And as well as making sure that it's just a deep cleaning of that unit before any other staff or members go into the unit, just in order to protect everybody involved. So those are some of the questions to think about when you're doing inspections. We understand that co-ops don't want to incur vacancy loss, but the reality of the situation is that might be needed. Unfortunately, vacancy loss might be an unfortunate reality during this pandemic. And to be alert to that, but if the co-op feels that they need to be doing inspections, to do it safely. In regards to continuing the maintenance procedures in a safe manner, the next question is, are co-ops required to conduct cleaning and disinfecting? So this is based on the advice we've gotten from BC Housing, and of course that's they're encouraging their housing providers to do deep cleaning of the buildings to a frequency of about 2 or 3 times a day. So what does that look like? So ensuring that those touch points that Thom had mentioned, the touch points such as the elevator, the laundry room machines, any door handles, countertops, your common area bathrooms, those have to be done with a deep cleaning. So your co-ops may need to speak with your management company, some of your own maintenance workers, the cleaners, to ensure that that's done. And that might be done, and BC Housing has acknowledged this, that you might have, because the frequency that's needed to ensure the safety for your members, that other work may need to be avoided. So things like washing the floors, that may be done a less frequency than doing those touch points that I mentioned. Can we complete repairs and upgrades during this time? And I know that as the anxiety we feel as individuals, as members around the pandemic, some of you on the board and co-op members may feel the anxiety around continuing the business at the co-op, making sure that some of those repairs, the unit renovations continue. And again, back to that, we reiterate the advice that this should be done safely. And how do we do this? Making sure that if we do repairs and unit upgrades, that they're done again in a vacant unit. Thinking about, can we only focus on the work that is an emergency and health and safety in order to protect the health and safety of our members and the employees of our co-ops. The other routine maintenance that has come up as a question from our members is around pest control. So we have checked with our co-management maintenance services, and they have confirmed that pest control is currently continuing to provide services. And the reason why they're able to do this is because the companies themselves have their own personal protective equipment that they can protect their own employees, but as well, they have their own procedures to ensure that not only are their employees protected, but also the units they're entering into. So I've been reassured that each contractor will provide, with the co-op, a list of instructions on how to best prepare a unit and also how to enter a unit safely. So some of the things that might have come up is entering the units when members are not there, or only if a member is sick, that letting the contractor know that they're not able to continue the pest control because that member is sick. So these are some of the conversations your co-op should be having with your maintenance company or your contractor in order to protect your own members. So hopefully you're doing that. Lastly, on maintenance is how do we access emergency supplies? So this is another key issue, and certainly CHF BC is working within our own group buying team to ensure that we can provide some access to maintenance supplies for our members. But in the meantime, BC Housing has offered to provide some emergency supplies to housing providers. Now, regularly they would be only providing to nonprofit housing cooperatives, nonprofit housing providers. But they are quite flexible during this time, and they are reaching out. They are willing to offer some supplies to our housing co-op members. So later on during the session, there will be a slide on additional resources that you can access, and do have a look at that, because during all this this situation of financial distress, co-ops can also find some assistance in how they can reduce their costs and get some assistance for themselves. So do have a look at that, and more information on any of our services that we can offer to our members will be provided to all of you.
Thanks, Ed. I just want to bring up, there's a lot of questions and a lot of points that are being made. So I'm just going to be, for some things that were already discussed. One person said that they were told that the public officials would notify members if they were if there was somebody in the co-op that had COVID-19. So that sort of talks a little bit about that. About the laundry room, one co-op has a policy or just sort of a notice that only one person is allowed in the laundry room at a time. So that's always a good idea. And then other co-ops, with respect to that financial slide, Tom, they're waiving any sort of NSF or late payment fees that they would typically charge. And that's what's happening. And they're protecting the privacy because their office staff is handling any sort of inquiries about people who've lost their jobs or can't afford to pay housing charges. I have one question about the physical distances. I think I know the answer to this question. We have had it come up where can a board meet if they're able to sit 2 meters apart? Like if they all brought their lawn chairs out into the a big meadow that is near the co-op, could they meet? And my answer to that question is I believe that they would, right, Tom?
Yeah, I actually
Or
had
no?
this. I had this conversation with the general manager of community services at the city of Vancouver. They have working teams. At least now they do at the city. I think there are some layoffs coming, but they've been in the habit of taking some of their smaller teams out on walking meetings where they stay, more than 2 meters apart, and they may stand in a big circle out in a park and make sure that they're a fair distance apart from each other. So I can imagine some situations in which a board might be able to reproduce those conditions, but you shouldn't underestimate either how difficult it might be to do business in those circumstances, and how easy it might be to let the distance involved slip, particularly when it comes time to exchanging documents or signing checks. It's easy to compromise the better standards around physical distancing. So I would say we're gonna get to that in a few minutes and talk about meetings, but I would say around that that issue, do examine your other options first before you try to do a workaround that involves actually meeting physically, because particularly for boards, you might find that that's not all that necessary. I just want to make a quick comment too on the other issue about people being notified that someone in the community is sick. That is not our information. The information we have is that information would absolutely not be released. And personally, I'm fine with that, because if you're observing best practices in physical distancing, in cleaning and sanitizing common areas, it actually shouldn't matter whether someone is sick with COVID-19 or something else, or perfectly healthy. You're going to be far enough away from them that it won't have an impact on you. So rather than stigmatize people who might be ill through no fault of their own, and rather than wonder about people who may actually have the virus but be completely asymptomatic, because that's really how it progresses, through someone's system. Better to observe those distance rules and make the whole question of whether someone is sick or not irrelevant.
Thanks, Tom. So those are really great points. So maintenance, we knew that this is a not hot topic that comes across our desks all the time. So one about the Ed, to you Ed, about the amount of time that that a unit should remain empty before you do a move out inspection. I think it's 3 days, is it? Or
yeah, our advice is at least 3 to 48 hours would be reasonable. But again, ensuring that when you're doing that deep cleaning, so that anybody else who's coming into those units would be ensuring that they're protected from anything that's been left over.
Yeah, and I was working with co-host staff as well, getting quotes on what would happen if we had a deep cleaning, and it was about $250 or something like that from that service. So it's not totally out there. I mean, it can add up over a number of units, of course. And this other question is about construction. If there's major construction, major project, what are the parameters around that?
Yeah, so work with your contractors. So some contractors will have their own requirements for their employees so that they're protected. But ensuring that those units, I'm thinking about, okay, is the work an emergency? You know, can it be done as safely as possible? So some of those unit renovations that are happening, flooring, for example, can it be done in a vacant unit when members are not around? So those are some of the questions that co-op should think about when they're continuing some of the work around repairs and renovations in their units. It's just not safe to do the work while members are in the units. As we've mentioned, you know, sometimes someone could be asymptomatic and have COVID, and it's just we would not be practicing physical distancing if we're continuing to do the work unsafely by doing work while members are around.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, the question that comes across my desk often is the issue of vacancy loss. If the work has to happen in order for them to fill the unit, then that has to be handled in a different manner, because the co-op doesn't want to incur vacancy loss by not doing those repairs. Do you have any other insight on that based on the conversations you've had?
Well, I think it's a holistic look around the cash flow of the co-op, right? So it's not thinking about, yes, the housing charge collection, the revenue collection, but then also thinking about the other expenses that are happening. So yes, vacancy loss may be an unfortunate reality of this pandemic, but what are the ramifications for not following, you know, physical distancing and on our members when we fail to do so, when we fail to protect our members? So understanding, yes, I guess the financial aspect, but then what are the impacts on the community as well?
Thanks. So there's one question about who do we use for deep cleaning, and we will add the contact information that we have in our response out with after this webinar. So we'll just move ahead.
And we're going to divide this up by federal and provincial governments, and we actually do have some news on these matters. So we'll start with the situation that was facing primarily Section 95 co-ops. And we know that the Federal Community Housing Initiative, or FCHI, Phase 2 was meant to kick in in April of this year, and because of the delays at CMHC and coming up with the new agreements, was delayed until September. So co-ops that were benefiting from the extension of their operating agreements and the maintenance of their subsidy amounts from CMHC can count on that continuing until September. And then, of course, for the longest time, we were talking to members about, you know, what's going to happen in September when the FCHI 2 comes into force. And there was a lot of speculation around what kind of agreement CMHC would come up with for co-ops to take them through from 2020 until March 31, 2028. Which is when this phase of the assistance is supposed to end. And on this, you know, I have to say my hat is off to the Co-op Housing Federation of Canada and the Agency for Co-op Housing, because they hung in tough with CMHC, and they fought the good fight against an initial draft agreement that was totally unsatisfactory for any number of reasons that we now fortunately don't have to go into, because the new agreement, which is starting now to be received by co-ops who will be eligible in September for the extension of their subsidy, is a very, very much improved document. I won't go into a lot of the details, and please don't interpret the advice I'm giving you as legal advice, because it's not. But the agreements provide for a higher level of assistance than some co-ops were expecting to receive. They provide for the potential to assist more members, and they also provide flexibility based on the co-op's needs to increase the amount of assistance that is delivered to co-ops during the extension phase of the agreement. So, for example, if housing charges go up as a result of an inflationary increase, the amount of assistance for subsidized members will go up as well. If the number of members, I mean, it's subject to a budget availability within CMHC, but if the number of members who require assistance based on a test of their income goes up, then additional assistance will be available. So it's very much where the Section 95 original program design created a subsidy pool that the co-op then distributed among eligible members. And of course, we saw the impact of that as mortgages rolled over at lower interest rates and subsidy pool shrank and expenses and housing charges went up, and the amount of subsidy turned out to be entirely inadequate. The extension of the agreement performs much more like a traditional rent supplement program, where the amount of assistance available increases to meet the need over time. So this is all very good news. And again, thanks to CHF Canada, thanks to the Agency for Cooperative Housing. Of course, being CMHC, the agreement is not perfect. There are some issues around the national occupancy standards and the kinds of action plans that co-ops will be expected to come up with around governance and asset management and social inclusion. But the good news is that we can help with that. And we already have an agreement between CHF BC, CHF Canada, and the agency to work on a platform to help you with that. So that's the FCHI 2. Good news on the, remember the co-ops whose agreements ended prior to April 1st, 2016. They were frozen out of the extension of CMHC subsidy, and we got a $2 million contribution from BC Housing to provide interim subsidy assistance to those co-ops. And we sent notices to them, 22 of them, about 145 income tested members, that we were going to run out of money in May, and that created a gap between May and September. BC Housing has agreed to supplement that pool with an additional grant of $210,000. We will be able now to keep extending that subsidy to those co-ops until the end of September, which should give us plenty of time to talk CMHC into doing the right thing and extending those agreements as well. And Michelle, I believe it's 7 o'clock.
That's
so there's
right.
something to do, right?
Yes. So I'm hoping you can see our screen. It's not working, Tom. We have this really great 7 p.m. salute from our Mission Housing Co-op, but I'm not technologically challenged right now.
Well, we can tell you that our friends out in Mission have a big sign in front of their co-op, and they have a tradition on the weekend of going out and hooting and hollering to salute first responders and medical personnel. So thanks to our good members in Mission for leading the way on that, and a bunch of other co-ops for following suit. We were down the list on the federal assistance. So that subsidy extension is good news. That will kick in, between now and September. Section 95 co-ops have subsidy surplus funds, and there's always been a question among those co-ops. When's the right time to use those subsidy surplus funds and when not? And I'd say, those surplus funds were put away for a rainy day. And if you look outside, pandemic-wise, it's pouring. So the rainy day has come, and now's the time to use those surplus funds to tide you over until the new terms of the FCHI program kick in, which, as we know, is in September. There's the potential we become aware of for mortgage deferrals certainly from CMHC, and CMHC is encouraging private lenders to show similar flexibility. Again, I would counsel the same thing on this as I did on housing charge collection. Don't leap to the conclusion that you need to defer a mortgage payment because you're compounding interest that may come back to make your life and your cash flow more onerous downstream. And if you haven't taken into account all of the other strategies that are available to you around maximizing revenue and minimizing expenses, you may find that the conversation with CMHC or another lender, for example, Van City, around deferring those payments is more challenging than you thought it might be. But that potential is there. If your cash flow is compromised to the extent that you think the mortgage payment coming up is going to be a problem, do have that conversation, especially if your lender is CMHC. But we saw in the poll that members are a little more optimistic about the prospect for collecting May housing charges than we thought they might be. And lastly, there is assistance for individual members through the emergency response program announced by the federal government. The details around eligibility for that program are quite specific, but co-ops should be encouraging their members to explore every avenue for individual assistance so that the potential impact on the co-op of loss of revenue is mitigated. And I think that's the full list of federal assistance that's available to date. But there is more news on the provincial front, which I think we've put, there it is on the next slide. So there's lots of stuff going on, both for co-ops and individuals, but the most prominent announcement has been around the temporary rent supplement program announced by the government of BC. And that was rolled out only less than a week ago, and already they have many thousands of applications for the rent supplement. And I know that some co-ops have already had direct deposits made to their accounts from that program. So the good news is that it's working and it's up and running, and it is delivering assistance to co-ops. So it's a two-step process, right? The member has to apply to BC Housing. Just Google BC Temporary Rent Supplement Program. You'll get access to an online application form. You need to give the co-op's contact information. So do check with your co-op to make sure you have that contact info as part of that individual application. And then the co-op is notified that there is an application and is invited to submit its own request for direct deposit, and then the deposit is made. So in the guidelines, wherever you read tenant, just substitute co-op member. Wherever you read landlord, substitute co-op. And the question that arose from that, based on some of the ambiguity in the program guidelines, was, well, are co-op members even eligible? And the short answer is yes, they are. Now, we saw three things that gave rise to some confusion in the guidelines. The first was the reference to market rents. So members who are paying I'm paraphrasing the guideline here, but members who are paying market rent, not in receipt of rent geared to income subsidy, are eligible to receive the temporary rent supplement. And some co-ops got in touch and said, well, but we don't pay market rent. We pay a maximum or break-even housing charge that is something less than the market rents in the surrounding area. So we've confirmed with BC Housing that what they meant to say, and they are going to change the published guidelines, what they meant to say by using the term market rent was maximum unassisted housing charge that's assessed by the co-op. So as long as you're not in receipt of income tested assistance, you're eligible for that subsidy. The next question that arose was the guidelines say that any co-op that's in receipt of operating funding from government is not eligible. And of course, many co-ops, especially Section 95 co-ops, get checks from CMHC every month. And the question was, well, does that count as operating funding? The short answer is no, because that money is given to the co-op on the explicit understanding that it will be used to reduce the housing charges paid by members who can't afford the full unassisted charge in the co-op. So money received via rent supplement program, via a subsidy pool in the Section 95 program, does not fall under the definition of operating funding. The only subsidy that does potentially is the money delivered to co-ops by CMHC under the ILM program. So raised a big question, are members of ILM co-ops that are not receiving rent supplements from BC Housing eligible? And early afternoon today, we were able to get BC Housing to confirm that indeed they are eligible. So this means that members in ILM co-ops, members in Section 95 co-ops, members in the original Section 61 federally funded co-ops who are not receiving rent geared to income assistance are eligible to apply under this program. So that's great news. Those households will receive payments to the co-op on their behalf of either $300 or $500 for the months of April, May, and June. The only people who are not eligible are people living in a BC Housing funded co-op, because BC Housing will make additional assistance available to those co-ops, and that assistance will be very flexible, or people receiving subsidized or subsidies under the Section 95 or the ILM program. So it's the thing to remember here, and what's going to be so important in getting this word out to your members and to the co-op, is that the payments under this program are not retroactive. They're meant to cover the months of April, May, and June, but if you don't apply in April, you don't get the payment for April. So, you know, this is April 22nd. That means there are 8 more days during which applications for the April rent supplement will be received. If you wait until May 1st to apply, you'll only get the subsidy for May and June. If you apply once, you get it for all the remaining months. So one application will do the trick. So there you have it. The temporary rent supplement program, we know it's up and running. We know it's delivering money into co-op bank accounts. All that remains for you to do now is apply. If you hear anything in the course of your interaction with BC Housing that's contrary to what we just explained, be in touch with us at the earliest opportunity and we will take care of it.
Thank you. And we've had a lot of questions out there. Lots of salutes about the pots banging. Some people missed a little bit of your speaking because it was so loud by their co-op. So that's always great.
That's never a problem.
Yeah, that's right. Confirmation that we're going to be sending copies of these slides out after, and
right.
We've answered the question about what the acronyms the FCHI stands for. So we'll move along.
Right. These are the very popular charts that have been published on the website. Our staffers there's so much evolution in government programs and assistance being directed toward the pandemic that staff are really struggling to keep up with this. But you'll see 4 tables: assistance available from the federal government to co-ops, assistance available from the federal government to individuals, assistance available from the province to co-ops, and assistance available to individuals from the province. So 4 tables, 4 sets of programs. Can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that co-ops and co-op members make the effort to become familiar with these programs so that the burden of dealing with any potential revenue loss from non-payment of housing charges can be mitigated by getting money from these sources into members' hands or the co-op's hands.
Thank you. So the next up is co-op meetings, and I'll just preempt a lot of these questions. I know that you're going to cover it. Where a lot of people are talking about delaying their SAGM to get budgets approved, or what happens if they call a board meeting and they feel that they can have it safely, but board members are not, directors are not attending. So I'll leave it over to, is that you, Fiona, meetings, or?
You might be stuck with me.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's actually Thom. Thom gets back to back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, back to back. Okay.
Okay. Well, so again, we'll be able to give you some news that we just learned today. So we're going to deal separately with board meetings and members meetings. Around board meetings, these are where I think there's more flexibility. But members have been saying, well, what constitutes a meeting? and what doesn't. You know, can we just send an email around and ask the directors if they agree with something, or you know, do we actually have to physically get together and have a meeting? And then, of course, members' meetings, much bigger challenge. You know, can they be postponed? Is it even possible to hold a members' meeting online? So, two things have happened. The first thing was, you know, co-ops were worried about the deadline for annual meetings, which is, you know, within 4 months of the end of your fiscal year, you're required to hold an annual meeting. And the business to be transacted there is the receipt of the annual report, the receipt of audited financial statements, the appointment of an auditor, and the election of directors. So, I mean, typically the corporate registry has been amenable to granting exemptions, but you had to, or extensions on those deadlines, but you had to go to the trouble of asking for them. But now the registry has issued a blanket extension and said that any co-op can extend the deadline for its annual meeting by 6 months, and the outside date they gave for that was September 30, 2020. Now, I will say there's a bit of ambiguity, as there quite often is in things that are issued from the government. It's not clear when the clock starts on the 6 months. So, you know, if you waited, if you had to have an annual meeting by, say, August of 2020, do you get a 6-month extension from August, or do all the 6-month extensions end in September? We are trying to get clarity around that from the registry, and we expect that we'll be able to persuade them to you know, give us a clear answer. But in the immediate term, you can be confident that no co-op, no matter when its fiscal year ends, no co-op will be forced to have an annual meeting anytime between now and the end of September. So, you know, that's something to work with. You know, co-ops might still decide they want to go ahead and try and have an annual meeting. We'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing that we found out literally today was around the holding of virtual or electronic meetings. You know, the model rules that CHF BC issued and the Act, they actually provide for the possibility of a virtual or an electronic meeting, but some co-op rules prohibited them. So what the Minister of Finance did today was override all those restrictions by ministerial order. So during the time of the state of emergency, even if a co-op either doesn't say in its rules that it can have electronic meetings, or goes as far as to say in its rules that it can't, those restrictions and constraints are overridden by the ministerial order. So the bottom line is that electronic meetings, should you decide you want to have one, are permissible. So probably best to start with board meetings. We did hear the question, you know, if the co-op has few enough directors and it has a big enough common area, can you haul out the lawn chairs and put them in a big circle and keep enough room between people to have a meeting? Sure. If, you know, depends on your appetite for risk, I suppose. But boards, you know, we've got, I'm just looking at, we've got 130 people logged into this town hall. We've been taking polls, and a poll is in effect a vote, right? If the options on the polls that you've been voting on so far had been yes or no, instead of all of the other options you were given to express an opinion on, you'd in effect be casting a vote in response to a motion that had been made. So, and if you're you know, tapped into a meeting by phone, or you have an audio connection on a computer, if you've only got 7 people around the table, you can take a yay nay vote as well. And as long as you're keeping track of who's there, making sure that you have quorum and you're keeping minutes of those decisions, then there's no reason not to be able to have an electronic or virtual meeting. Now, we do have the question, you know, what do you do about people who don't have internet access? And the short answer to that is almost everybody has a phone. or can get access to a phone. And the real test of whether or not you have a validly constituted meeting is not that you can see each other, but that you can hear each other. So as long as you're, we have, I have had telephone conference meetings with the board of CHF BC and with the board of Incasa Financial Inc. And those meetings are legally and duly constituted. They make decisions that are binding on the organization. There's no reason that can't be done. There also is the option for very straightforward issues of using what's called a consent resolution. There's some confusion around what those are. They don't record the results of a meeting, they take the place of a meeting. So let's imagine you have a board of 6 directors, and there's a bit of perfunctory business that has to be done. Maybe a committee's interviewed a new member, and all the board is left to do is to approve that new member. If somebody types up a resolution, that the following application for membership be approved, and puts signature lines for the 6 directors on the bottom of it, circulates that electronically, and either individually or on the same document, you get the signature of all 6 directors, then you have what's called a valid consent resolution, which is in force as if it was a meeting duly held by the directors. So that consent resolution, once signed, goes into the minute book of the co-op and becomes part of the formal record of business that was transacted. So there it is. It's doable. It depends, on your how willing you are to embrace this new world. But plenty of boards meet that way anyway. Imagine the board of Mountain Equipment Co-op with directors scattered all across the country. They don't get together every time to meet, and plenty of other boards of directors do business the same way. So we're planning actually on offering more support to members in this area. We have the meeting platforms. We have people who are experienced in chairing that type of meeting or in providing advice around holding those meetings. So we expect to launch very soon a program of active support for both board and members meetings if co-ops choose to go that route. Members meetings, a little more tricky, but not all that challenging when you think about it. The first question to ask yourself is there really business for the members to do? You're obliged to hold an annual meeting a year, but sometimes you find that the business you're doing at members meetings didn't really need to be done. But if it does, then the virtual platform you can use has to be a little more sophisticated. You need to be people to be able to, again, log in. You have to be able to verify attendance, confirm quorum, and be able to take accurate counts of votes. But again, we've got 130 people logged on tonight. We've had several polls that it can be done. It's just a different kind of meeting experience. The wrinkle comes when you are required to have an election, which has to be conducted by secret ballot. And that's another layer of complexity, for which there actually are electronic solutions, right? So our staff are experimenting now with a software called Election Runner. We've used it actually to hold, we elected a board at CHF BC, not a board of people, but a board made up of people's favorite pets. But it was a binding election with fraud prevention mechanisms built into the back end of the software. And so we're, again, going to say to members, if you want to explore the potential for holding meetings this way, we will offer the supports you need to make it not only a legally valid experience, but a good experience as well for members. And that's something that we can commit to. So the only thing that you can't do, and this has always been a question, pandemic or not, is do business by email. And quite often somebody will, the chair of the board or members will send an email around to all the directors and say, does everybody agree that this is okay. And you get 7 emails back saying, yep, no problem. And you treat that as a decision having been made by the board, but it's not, because you didn't have a meeting. You didn't hear each other. You didn't have a chance to exchange opinions, and you didn't have a vote that was counted properly. So that's the only thing you can't do. And lastly, I think we've got these questions that have come to us from members. Can we hold board and general meetings outside? As the weather improves, that's a good qualification, while maintaining social distancing. I think we've answered that. You can, but boy, you have to be sure that you are practicing that distancing and respecting the direction of the provincial health officer while you do that. I would suggest you explore some of the virtual options before you feel that you have to do that. But of course, that depends on your co-op culture and the size of your co-op as well. I'm going to duck the middle question. The co-op is a membership termination meeting in progress. The appeal of the termination has been canceled. Will we have to start the process over when members can meet in the future? We have had conversations with co-op legal counsel around this. Membership terminations, I mean, they're being discouraged anyway, at least for grounds of non-payment by both BC Housing, the provincial government, and CMHC, but they are very problematic around whether there is compatibility between some of the virtual options that are available and the principles of natural justice, which are so important to the termination process. So luckily, in the not too distant future, and the date will be on one of the last slides in the town hall, we are holding in webinar format the equivalent of our Ask the Lawyers workshop that is always popular at our education conferences. And both Jeffrey Dabbs and Grant Haddock will make an appearance. You will get to see them in their pandemic haircuts or what passes for them. And you'll have the same chance to torment them over the ether as you do when you show up at our education conferences. So I'm sure this question will be a popular one, maybe even the one we lead off that webinar with, and you'll get to hear the answers. Lastly, we need a special meeting to adopt our new rules and occupancy agreement. Can we legally move ahead without an in-person meeting? You can legally move ahead with a meeting. As long as, again, you have proper notice, quorum, and the resolution passes by a special resolution, which is relatively easy to calculate. As long as you're tracking attendance and essentially doing a vote by division, which, if you've ever seen them in the House of Commons where they have to cast a vote, they're not sure which way it's going to go, and every MP has to stand and declare their position to the speaker, and then the clerk of the House of Commons counts up all those votes, and the motion passes or it fails. And you can do the same, essentially the same thing over the phone or online. And again, we're perfectly happy to help you out with that. We've had a lot of experience with telephone conference calls held to discuss the new rules and occupancy agreement. And if that's your preference, and you want to go ahead and try that virtually, we're perfectly happy to help you with that as well.
Thanks, Tom. And speaking of polls, since we're going to wrap up these meetings, there's quite a lot of questions about meetings. So I'm going to start a poll, and then I'm going to read some of the questions to you. So this poll is now open for your voting. And so some of the questions that are coming up, one is one member wants to have a meeting to increase housing charges. How can they go ahead and do that? Can they do that virtually online as well? Or any recommendations around that?
Well, that's a decision that there are options built into the occupancy agreement. In some co-ops, the board makes decisions around housing charge increases. In other co-ops, more co-ops, the members have to make that decision. But they have to make it based on a recommendation brought by the board. So the first step in that would be a board meeting to decide if that's the recommendation going forward. And if it is, then the board would just have to figure out how to hold a virtual meeting along the lines that we just talked about. The motion initially would be pretty simple, to approve the following schedule of housing charges for the fiscal year beginning, whatever it is. It's a tricky chairing exercise if there are amendments to the motion, but again, that's all doable. It's just a different kind of experience and one that we'd be perfectly happy to help co-ops try out.
Okay, great. We have another question with respect to proxy votes. It's not, of course, having a proxy votes for a virtual AGM or AGM or general meeting of sorts.
Yeah, you're lucky you don't have to worry about this because proxy voting in housing co-ops is not allowed or permitted under the Co-op Act. So whether your meeting is virtual or in person, proxy votes are out of the question.
Okay, and the next question about meetings is if their AGM is extended for 6 months, my understanding, Tom, is that the board term goes from AGM to AGM. So for directors, their terms are extended to the next AGM. They continue to be directors unless they
That's right.
don't want to, unless they resign,
Yeah.
right? So.
It's a good question because the terms for directors are expressed in the rules in years, right? So you're elected for a 1-year term, you're elected for a 2-year term, but a year is defined for this purpose as the period between AGMs. So even if the time from one AGM to another is 16 months, for the purpose of calculating the term of a director, that period of time is the equivalent of 1 year, but by definition.
Great. We're getting a lot of positive feedback about support for member meetings virtually, so that's really good. And some people are asking if there's a preference of Zoom or WhatsApp to have a virtual meeting, as long as you can hear each other and everyone can speak, right?
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see the different kinds of preferences expressed for different platforms. So the CHF BC staff now meet entirely on MS Teams. The CHF BC board prefers the Zoom platform, and here we are on the GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting. So there are a number of choices, and it'll be a question of just deciding what the right fit is for you. But what CHF BC is prepared to do so that co-ops don't incur the expense of licensing all these platforms for themselves is to make our platform available on terms that we still have to work out, but I think that can be arranged very quickly so that you don't have to make that investment in the platform yourself.
Okay, great. And the last question with respect to sort of meetings is you talked about not conducting the business of the co-op via email, but one member has a question about not wanting to give out notices of member meetings in physically, and that that exchange. So could we put a notice of a general meeting out by email?
Yes, as long as that method of serving or delivering notice is allowed in the co-op's rules, then it's a valid notice of meeting or a notice of motion. And the model rules, if the co-ops have adopted the model as they're currently written, that type of notice is permitted.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'll just share the results of the poll. It should be there right now. Some people are seeing the poll but unable to vote, and I think we did kind of experience that technical glitch when we were doing a run through, and I think it's just maybe some different devices don't allow that. But it's a good representative sample. At least 60% of the people that are here voted, and they're saying that 49%. More than almost half think that it would be good for board meetings, but not. But that's all that they would do for virtual meetings. Interesting. Okay, so I'm moving right along. It's 7:30 right now, and we have until 8. So I think we're right on time. CHF BC Services, who's speaking to that?
That's me, Fiona.
Hello, Fiona.
Hi, everybody. So I can't believe we're already at CHF BC Services. So lots of great content. This is just, we wanted to kind of remind you that we are still here. We're still providing most of our services, and I'll just give you a quick run through of what might have changed in all of, commercial services, education, communications, planning and renewal, and advocacy. So let's take a look on the next slide. Can we see the next slide, Michelle?
Sorry.
Thanks, sorry. I can't remember what I was going to say. Right, for education, like this virtual webinar, we've got consultations, like Tom was saying, possibly helping co-ops hold meetings, consulting with co-ops virtually if they need, and all our education offerings will be free through the end of June. So you don't have to worry about that. If you want to get some education, get in touch with us. And you can see the full listing of events we have lined up, including the one for Ask the Lawyers, which will be May the 6th. And that's going to be on our event calendar. And again, just keep checking back too, because as we add and change things, they will be there.
Okay.
Next slide. Group buying. So we did send out a message about our update on what's happening with group buying, but in case you missed it, Trail Appliances is doing curbside delivery, but is not doing haul-aways of appliances. Our cabinets and countertops program with Danube Kitchens in the Lower Mainland and flooring here and on the island, all those companies are only doing service on request. And I would imagine that would be with safety in mind, like empty units, things like that, emergencies. The CHIP program, the Co-op Housing Interest Pool, it's continuing, of course, but like the entire economic market, it has also gone down a lot. But the interest rate that co-ops get on their operating accounts is still 0.5% higher than anything else for an account that's not part of that pool. So you can be assured that we're doing our best with that. Rona is still available. They still are open for in-person shopping and online. So you can shop with them online if you prefer. Telecom program, you can still sign up for it. You can still get speed upgrades, but if you needed any kind of technical support entering your units, the technicians are not doing that right now. That's with TELUS. And Waste and Recycling is doing its regular service, but it's also at what it always does, but it's getting a lot of demand right now for yard waste bins as people do yard cleanup for the spring. So you can check in and you can still get all of those things, and they're on our website, and you can contact us at members@chf.bc.ca. So other stuff that we do, advocacy, we are continuing to work with the Vancouver leasehold co-ops, and we'll be having a town hall for them coming up soon. And we're, of course, advocating with government, and you can see the results in our recent announcements that Tom was making. Some of the things that we didn't know would be applicable for co-ops, we were able to ask and get extensions for the co-ops that came out of their agreements before April 2016, find out information about what's going on with all the programs and how co-ops can be eligible. The planning and renewal program is still working with clients and helping them as much as it can using safety precautions, depending what stage their projects are in, and making sure if they need financing, trying to help them get that as well. And you can contact them at renewal@chf.bc.ca. And of course, we are here all the time, phone calls, emails. You can email us and we will help you find answers to your questions. Like, so after this workshop, after this town hall, if you have questions that weren't answered, just get in touch with us and we'll do our best to get you the best answer.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to the chat. It's quite a busy chat, which is always good. Love it that our members are engaged. Some question about group buying program for garden supplies. I believe we can use Rona for garden supplies.
Yeah, Rona, and you'll get a discount as a member.
Yeah, a rebate that comes at the end. That's right. Was one question about what happens if we're still in this pandemic 6 months from now. Will CHF BC advocate on behalf of co-ops to extend that AGM extension? And I think it applies to all co-ops, not just housing co-ops. So
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think the government or the registry made the decision it did around September based on the information that was available to it at the time. but you know, I don't have any reason to think that the restrictions on large gatherings of more than 50 people are going to be lifted by September. Certainly, you know, big ticket events in Vancouver like the PNE and Pride have already made the decision to pull the plug on their schedules based on the direction from the provincial health officer. So I have no doubt that if it is contrary to the advice of provincial health officials after September to hold those gatherings, the registry will follow suit and extend that. And if there's any resistance to that at all, you can count on us to be advocating for co-ops, not just on that issue, but on others as well. You know, as I said earlier, our goal is not just to scrape through this. Our goal is to build resilience and capacity, not just for CHF BC, but for every member co-op as well. And I look forward to being stronger as a movement, as an organization, when the pandemic has run its full course. And you know, let's face it, none of us know when that's going to be. So we're planning for the long haul, as we always do, and trying to make decisions that are in the best interests of our members and our staff and our board.
Thanks. I'm just trying to work my way through some of the questions, make sure I didn't miss anything, because this is just about the wrap up now. There's one question about membership interviews for prospective members. I would guess that you could try to do it just like we're doing it right now via virtual. Is that your recommendation?
Yeah, in fact, you know, as our chief operating officer, you're in charge of HR for the CHF BC group, and I believe that you have done exactly that. And
that's right. I've had 4 interviews on virtual as well.
And I think it's a perfectly viable option for co-ops. In fact, I'm a little surprised that it hasn't become kind of par for the course before we had a pandemic to deal with, because it's so efficient and so environmentally responsible as well.
And it's good to know that CHFBC is moving ahead with our scholarship committee, which typically this time of year you'd be finding out for our SAGM, which we can no longer have, who the scholarship. That's always our feel-good meeting of the year. So CHFBC is going ahead with those interviews, and we're doing it virtually as well. In fact, they're happening this week, right? And the panel is in place. We did arrange for, we couldn't get them lunch, so we got them skip the dishes so they could order their own lunch. There's lots of really creative ways that we're still meeting and carrying on business as usual. So it's really great. And it sounds like from our co-ops, they are doing things differently as well. Some co-ops talk about everybody comes out of their door and bangs pots at 7 o'clock as well. There's a lot gardening happening. And then there's always that good neighbor, which we know housing co-ops are all about, and offering to get groceries for people. I want to assure you guys that there's a lot of chat and there's some really great ideas in there. So we will be saving those questions. So you'll have it, not the questions, but the comments as well. You'll have the comments as well as the recording of tonight's town hall available to you online. And so I think I'm up next.
I think so.
Okay. So I'm going to do another poll because I'm getting really good at them. And I would just like to see, I'll be sending one out about what you thought about these virtual meetings. But this is the schedule of meetings that are coming up. Everything is going virtual until we can get back to normal, whatever normal is, hashtag the new normal. But these are the events that are coming up. And Tom, you had an announcement to make?
Yes, and Fiona already mentioned it. We want to do our bit to take some of the financial pressure off co-ops by offering all the events you see on the schedule without the usual charge that would come with it. So these will all be free to CHF BC members as we kind of chart together what the new normal is going to be. As you know, as you said, the one phrase that I don't hear now that I did hear a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago was, what will things be like when we return to normal? Nobody's talking about returning to normal anymore. Everyone's talking about creating a new normal. And that conversation is going out around about housing policy, about issues like safe supply and protection of vulnerable communities. So I'm looking forward so much to working with our staff and our board and our members to create that new normal, and offering education events like this free of charge to members is just one way we can say thank you for your loyalty, and you know, let's do this together.
Okay, there's some questions probably because we're wrapping up and it's 7:44, so we still have a few minutes. I do wanna, this question has come up a few times and I'm not sure that we answered it clearly. If a board feels that it can have a meeting, they feel that they can do it safely, whether it's Zoom or whether they or not they can do the 2 meters distancing. What do you do if directors refuse to attend? If you have quorum, should you could continue?
Well, I mean, I guess that's a governance decision for the co-op to make. Let's assume that there's no pandemic. In the course of ordinary business of a co-op board, you would serve notice of meeting. You would expect to get quorum to conduct the business based on the notice, and you would do that, right? So it's not uncommon outside the context of a pandemic to operate as a board with fewer than the total number of directors serving. I do think, though, that you have to ask yourself if that's really the way you want to go. If someone is declining to show up at a meeting in person out of a genuine anxiety for their personal health and safety, like maybe they're of an age that makes them more vulnerable. Maybe they have an underlying health condition that makes them that puts them more at risk than someone else. I think you would want to at least offer them the opportunity to attend the meeting by different means. It's, even if the rest of the directors decide they're going to get together around a big table or around a barbecue pit outside, there's no reason that you can't wire another director or 2 or 3 in by telephone or conference phone, because every smartphone I've seen comes with a speaker on it, and it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, that's what I know that some boards are doing. They're actually they're just merging sometimes 1 or 2 people on the call, and then everybody else is meeting. So they'll have 4 people in a meeting room, and the other 3 directors are attending by telephone. So I've known a few co-ops that have done that as well.
And again, as long as everyone can hear everyone, then that's a valid meeting.
And I do want to point out that in the bulletin that that CHF BC received today about getting those doing virtual meetings for AGMs, the bulletin explicitly says that if an online meeting platform is chosen, organizers should consider providing a telephone option for people without access to computer, and that's right there in the bulletin. So that's it's right. Definitely a high recommendation to have 2 options. And also it depends on your board as well. This particular question is about a budget. They want to have a budget meeting, and can the board make the decisions without the membership? But that depends on who has the authority to approve the budget.
That depends entirely on the occupancy agreement.
Yeah.
Some occupancy agreements will say, well, let me back up just a second. There's a pervasive misunderstanding among many co-ops that the members approve the budget when they get together to consider the housing charges. And if you read the model occupancy agreement carefully, and I think a very, very high percentage of co-ops have adopted the model occupancy agreement, whether it's 1.0 or 2.0, the members don't in fact approve the budget. In the same way that at the annual meeting, they don't approve the audited financial statements. They receive it, They receive the audit report, they receive the budget as background or backup to the housing charges, and what they're approving are the housing charges.
Housing charges, yeah.
Now that can still be done at a virtual meeting because that motion requires a simple majority. So all you need to be able to do is verify that more people have cast a vote in support of the motion than have cast a vote against it. And on the kind of platforms that we're used to using, that's a relatively simple procedure.
Okay, so 2 more questions before we wrap up. I hate to put you on the spot there, Fiona, but this question comes up a lot about connecting co-ops. And this one question is, co-ops need to share experiences and problem solving with each other. And how can we share a platform so that we can learn from each other? And I happen to know, maybe just
Well,
introduce it slightly because it's in the early stages yet, right?
yeah, I don't know if it answers all of what people are looking for, but we're about to launch. There's a program called Buddy Systems, and it's in the cooperative sector in Canada, and they've just got a grant, and we're going to do a trial of their program and called Buddy Up, and we're going to do it for housing co-ops, and that will mean it'll be a platform where people can share services, request services, and share ideas. Now, it's not going to be a place where you can go, hey, how do you guys handle difficult members? It won't be that kind of a platform.
It's
But if you're
definitely
looking for
social.
a place to share, it's a way to connect with other co-ops in a positive sharing kind of way. I mean, otherwise, if you wanted just to, chat with other people in co-ops, on our Facebook page, you can post questions. But anyway, I hope that answers your question, but watch for it in the next couple of weeks. We should be launching Buddy Up for co-ops. Well, we might call it something else. Community sharing for co-ops. Yeah.
Yeah, it's being spearheaded by the BC Cooperative Association, and I knew that we would have to have a meeting where people are asking for an update of leases. Tom, did you just want to wrap it up about if there's any update on the city leases?
As you can imagine, the city is just as challenged in dealing with business, during the pandemic as anyone else. In fact, they're even a bit more challenged because they're faced with a fairly radical restructuring of their staff team. But we have, I know that some co-ops were worried about the deadline approaching very shortly now, just in a couple of days, for responses to the online survey that the city issued around options for leasehold co-ops. And I've been assured by the city manager responsible that sometime in the next couple of days, they'll be making public their intention to extend the deadline for responses to that survey. So we've been doing a lot of work gathering information that's been very generously provided to us by member co-ops, excuse me, to crunch those numbers in ways that reveal things that we weren't really aware of as far as the implications of the framework proposed by the city. So we're looking forward to sometime in May sharing the results of that work with members in a town hall format. But in the meantime, you don't have to worry about the sun setting on the survey that the city had issued, because that will be extended.
Great. So this slide has some of the resources that we sort of spoke about during the town hall today. Obviously, we have a designated page on our website, and also there's the application for the temporary rent supplement. This BC Housing Operations Manual is a really great resource, and it really kind of delves on a very granular level on how on some best practices for housing providers. So we think not all of it applies because it's focused for nonprofit housing and we are cooperative housing, but I think there's enough content there that can really help co-ops do that and as they sort of navigate through the next few months. BC Nonprofit Housing has launched this really great housing job match, and there are some. It's sort of a resource that shares if an employer is looking to hire a housing specialist to take care, housing administrative services or any kind of housing services, custodians or otherwise, and also for employers that are looking for people that have lost their jobs or displaced with that particular expertise. So this is a really great resource that we're sharing with you as well. And of course, you can reach us at any time. This is our members at, and Fiona and Ed, Ed is offline. Maybe you can come back online for a bit there, Ed, to say goodbye. Anyways, there you are.
There he is.
Okay, so the feedback has been really, really positive. There's a lot of really great feedback, not just about cooperating and having that community spirit, but also of the feedback of CHF BC's response to this and being, I believe one word is called nimble. We were called nimble. That's really great. But being able to respond quickly and in a time-sensitive thing for members, so it's been really great. And you will get this, Fiona. How is this getting out? By be a survey going out, which will be automatically
Yeah.
triggered through this platform. But then there will be a link to the recording of this town hall that will be on our website. Is that right?
That's right. We'll probably send out an e-news too with that link as well. So we'll make it so it's easy for people to find. Even people who didn't participate in the webinar should be able to watch it. So
great. And this is the photo from our mission that I finally
you
made
found
it to. Yes, it's at the very end. But
Yeah.
this is from Mission Housing Co-op. So I think it's a great slide to end on. And thank you everybody, and stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Night.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.